Welcome to the Donna Sebo Show Special Editions. This program is dedicated to featuring authors and experts from around the world who will share their knowledge and insight with you, the viewing and listening audience. Literacy and education are the keys to freedom, and diversity enables one to live in a world with broader perspectives. This is Donna Sebo, and I will be your host for the next hour.
Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Donna Sebo Television Show Special Editions. I'm Donna Sebo, and I am delighted that you are joining me because we are going to be talking with this program about an event that occurred in the state of Washington, well, a long time ago. And my guest, Braschler, is a man that wrote a book called Survival in a Mill Town. Now, for those of you that have lived in the Pacific Northwest, you're very, very familiar about the lumber mills, and very familiar if you've lived here long enough to know that it had a significant part in Washington history. That's what we are going to be discussing, and I think you're going to be surprised because I'd learned about an event that happened in 1916, I believe, the Everett Massacre. Have you heard of that? I had no idea that this was a part of Washington history. I want to welcome you, Vaughn, to the program. It's a delight having you as a guest. You've been on my radio show. And when I got your book, Survival in a Mill Town, I was absolutely fascinated with all of the history. Now, this is a historical novel,
yes,
and it is based on real facts. But so many times historical novels are written by people like yourself who say, I want a part of history to be remembered because there is a great deal we can learn from the past if we're willing to do that. So here we are. We're going to be talking about survival in a mill town. Now, Washington, has this been your home?
I was born and raised in Everett, Washington, the site of the Everett Massacre. So I grew up with all of these streets and situations in recent history, and I noticed that they were just being ignored as though it didn't happen, like the Spanish flu. It never happened. You know, it's just something you conveniently forget. But it molded the community I grew up in. And I grew up with this backdrop, and I grew up with the mills all around us. It was called the City of Smokestacks, 30 mills in this little town. And later on, I could see that it wasn't just a local situation. It was maybe a fatal moment in mill history, but there were mills everywhere. And this situation was not unique just to Everett, but it was unique to me because it was part of my life. And I wanted it to be rekindled and brought to life and not swept under the carpet anymore.
Well, one of the aspects that fascinated me right from the beginning is that we're starting in the 1800s in the book. And when we today, here we are, 2026, when we look at what's around us, our technology, everything that we have that we take for granted, really, and it's evolved very quickly when you think about the time frame. But this evolves around your book, Survival in a Mill Town, evolves around that late 1800 period. And at that time, people were coming out to the West Coast because they felt they could have something better. And many, many people in the 1800s, they didn't have very much money, so anything that would offer them a job opportunity, I mean, that goes on even today. Anything that offers a job opportunity, then you're going to seek out that environment. So there was this opening of land in Washington, and that opening of the land then enabled people to come out. And James is the male in the primary character, and Lydia is the female. She is his wife. Now, she is German, he is Dutch. They're next door neighbors in Europe.
Yeah, yeah.
So a lot of the patternings between the two cultures were very compatible.
Yep.
And she comes out with him to the West Coast. They come out because they're going to have a farm, and they're able to open the opportunity. They're able to take advantage of that opportunity that enables them to get 20 acres. And they were doing a great job. They had this small farm. Had cows and, you know, the chickens, and his wife was very resourceful. She had her garden, and he loved being a farmer. And he had a brother named Will, and then there was Bess, Will's wife. So you have this family orientation, and it's the cultures. It's the cultures that have such an impact, and even their belief systems, and you know what they've got going on in their lives. It's so amazing. And in your own family history, you had people that were doing something very similar, weren't they?
Yeah, and it's important to note that a lot of the people that came to the Pacific Northwest and the area we're talking about, Snohomish County and Washington, came from handbills that were delivered throughout the Midwest, and a lot of them hopped on the train, which had just come through in the 1890s, and they came to this town looking for farmland, and they were just not that familiar with the country. They were maybe second generation, maybe first Americans, but they were Midwesterners. A lot of them were Midwesterners. So like we have the Scandinavians, the Germans, the Dutch, you know, my characters come from the Midwest, and all of their relatives came from the Midwest. And it's been pointed out to me by a lot of my friends back in the Midwest, I'm describing Midwest values here in the Pacific Northwest. And that's true. They did bring their values with them. The churches, the family, the farm, you know.
That was their life.
That was it.
They really weren't out trying to explore the world. They were on their farm. They were taking care of their animals. And this couple opted not to have children right away because James was adamant. He did not want to bring a child into the world until he could really feel like he could afford it.
That's right.
That was, you know, that was very important to him. So they had their community that they were engaged with. And I was so intrigued with the lifestyle, and you go into quite a bit of detail on that in the book. And I think that that's very important because so often we don't even, in our world today, you have your cell phones, you have, you know, the internet, you can do FaceTime on your cell phone with anybody in the world, just about. And then the communities were very tight. They were very tight communities. And well, let's face it, they were working most of the time. I mean, when you run a farm and you've got animals to take care of, you don't go off to Las Vegas for 3 days. I mean, it's not going to happen.
Well, their activity was the church, which was very ethnic. They were ethnic churches. In their case, they were Dutch Reform, and their relatives, and that was their world. Now, it wasn't everybody that he described in the Everett Massacre. There were a lot of people that they lived in the saloons, or then they had the speakeasies, because Washington was dry then. We were a dry state before the nation was dry.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so we had speakeasies, and we had cafes that served liquor. So these were kind of red light districts, you know, and this was a big part of it. So we had a lot of these illegal saloons, and we had a lot of churches, and we had a lot of mills.
Now that's what I want to get into, because survival in a mill town was not an easy situation. People didn't make a lot of money, but the environment of the mill town. What was life like in a mill town?
Well, the streets were muddy. They'd taken up all the logs that were where the town started, and then they removed the stumps eventually. They removed the stumps. And then the streets were just filled with mud because they weren't paved or in any way compacted. And they didn't worry about that because this was a little bit before cars. And they had boardwalks, and you'd walk down one street, a block, with little shops, and then you'd come to the intersection, and you'd have to step down from the boardwalk into the mud. So it was a muddy environment, and it rains because
Yeah,
it rains.
Yeah, we have a lot of that here.
And they didn't have medical attention, nor did they have money for medical attention. It was a long time before they had any professional medical care.
Well, that is something you bring out too, because it was very harsh as an environment for men as well as the women.
Yes.
And this is something I feel that many times the younger generations today are not aware of how tough it is for the men as well as the women.
That's true.
At that time, because there was not anything like Social Security, there was no health coverage whatsoever. If there were doctors, they were usually had to go out a long ways to get to the people that needed the medical attention.
Yeah.
And you might only have one that's covering 100 miles or more.
Yeah.
If you're lucky to get to that person. So at that time, midwives
Yeah.
were really very, very important.
Yep.
And they knew about the herbs and the different things. And the character Lydia, she did that. But that's what she grew up with.
Yep.
That was the women, the midwives,
Yep.
that would be there for women when they were giving birth. They didn't have a doctor they could call or a hospital they could go to if
Yes.
things got critical.
Yes. And it was such a harsh environment that we would have orphans as a result of people working in the mills. It was dangerous. And, we had an orphanage in the town of Everett. I grew up near the orphanage. And they were not funded well. They were not well treated. These were children, very often, of former mill workers. And the children had it especially tough because they'd have to walk to school in the mud.
Well, and we talked today about the helicopter parents that make sure everything's just so.
Yeah.
But at that time, that
No.
was not the case.
No.
And children often were working at jobs, doing whatever they could, but it was very common for the husband and the wife, or a brother and a sister, whatever was in that family environment, everybody had to do something.
Yeah.
Because they were on the farm, and you had to do that. It just was a part of the life. Now, one of the things that we have the privilege of being able to share, and that is some of the photos that you sent me, and we've got them here in studio. And this photo here that we're looking at, is that the first one? That is Everett.
That's Everett, early Everett, very early. And you could see the railroads come through. The railroad came through with James J. Hill, the empire builder, and he called the train the Empire Builder of Great Northern, and that came through in '93. And so there's a real connection to St. Paul, Minnesota. James Hill, his neighbor was George Weyerhaeuser. These names are familiar to people in the Pacific Northwest.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, and they're still familiar to the people in St. Paul, Minnesota. So here you see the railroad, and they would load up those cars. Now, the whole conspiracy was to build the railroad and then fill up all those cars with lumber and shakes and shingles and pulp paper and run it out of town. It was just develop the land and process everything from the forest. So you can see all the mills, it's just wall-to-wall mills. There were like 25 shake and shingle mills. There were like about 6 lumber mills for timber and processed lumber. And there were at one time 3 pulp and paper mills. We had a lot of mills, and you could hardly tell where one mill starts and the other one. And they were on one end of the town, Riverside, where this occurs, Riverside. by the Snohomish River, and the other mills were on the other side of the town, which was called Bayside, which was Puget Sound.
Now, we also have a photo of the downtown area of Everett.
Yeah.
And we're going to be bringing that up because it's so different. I mean, you go into Everett today and you would not even...
I mean, I can identify it because I lived in Everett so long, since...
But you can see all of the trolleys.
The trolleys, yes.
You look at the trolleys, you see all of those buildings, and...
Well, early on, Everett was connected to Seattle by trolleys, and then...
Really?
Yeah, then they got rid of the trolleys because they said, we don't need them, we have cars now. But, early on they had trolleys. Now, this shows an intersection, Hewitt and I believe Wetmore, and you're looking out toward the bay in the distance there. And this is kind of like Everett now, but it's way built up over this. It's a big town now, but
it is.
It's important to keep in mind that the time of the Everett Massacre and the turn of the century, around 1900, oh my goodness, like the 60s when Boeing started working out there, the population was always in the mid-30s. And then boom, you have Everett today, which is quite large.
Now, we also have a photo, and I love these photos that you sent. We have a photo of the mills.
Yep.
And lumber mills, I don't know how many people have ever had a chance. Now, that is, you just mentioned the massacre, and this is the beginning of this. And we'll come back to the mill picture, but what I wanted to say is very few people today have any idea of what it was like working in those mills. Now, we've got this image here, and this is showing the beginning of the upheaval on the part of workers that were in the mills.
Yeah, it's important to study this picture to understand the people and how desperate they were. They worked really, really hard, you know. And here that you see a lot of them, they put on their Sunday best, which really wasn't much. And they would come out and see how muddy the streets are. And you could see young boys, you know, they had boys working in mills.
Oh, yes.
And they were just surviving on like 25 cents an hour, losing their fingers and their arms in these mills that were unsafe. And if you'd lose your hand, well, you just lost your job. There was no safety net whatsoever for these poor people. Now, these are people that are really desperate. They've tried reasoning with the mill owners. They would go out inside of before the mill would open. They'd have signs that would say, you know, fair wages, you know, reasonable hours. And then the whistle would blow. They put down their sign, and like good, dutiful workers, they would go inside and do their job. And this is the way these people were raised, you know.
And you look at the photo, and you see not 5 or 10, you see hundreds.
Yeah.
With all of the mills that were at that time, the lumber industry was huge in this state.
Huge.
Yes, it was huge in this state. And so when we are looking at that photo, it makes us aware that this was something that was creating the base of planning for a demonstration.
Yes, yes.
And that's where the information about the Everett Massacre, when I came across that in the book, I was really, really shocked.
Yeah.
I was really shocked because I had no idea that, and I've been here for quite a long time, I had no idea that this was part of Washington history. So here we have a situation that there's that breaking point. Now, this had occurred on the East Coast.
Yes.
There had been upheavals on the East Coast.
Yes.
Women working in factories that had no air, and they worked for 12, 14 hours a day, being paid pennies. And to find out that these men in the sawmills, just like the women on the East Coast in like New York City and Chicago, being paid so little, no safety precautions whatsoever. These men were making 25 cents an hour.
For many years, the wages...
25 cents an hour.
Yeah.
Now, I'm thinking like today, but that's the wrong way to think, because this is back in the 1800s and early 1900s. But it took a long time before this came up. So with the Everett Massacre, one of the factors that contributed to this is the fact that there were investors that came in. And the railroad had come in. Then you had all of these people coming in via the railroad. So the railroad barons, if you will, were making money hand over fist, and they set up the rails to be compatible with the mills.
Yes.
Because you had to have the trucks that would bring the trees down from wherever. Then they had to be loaded onto the cars and the box cars, so that they could be transported to wherever they were needed. And the wood here was absolutely fabulous because it was old growth.
Yes.
Old growth.
Huge trees.
Do you know what the largest tree that was taken down?
Oh, I'm going to guess 120 feet high. Big Douglas fir for the most part.
Wow.
Huge trees. We don't see them anymore. There's just nothing left of that. I mean, there are some old growth lumber sites, some timber sites, but mostly they've taken all the old growth trees. Now, Weyerhaeuser himself had almost a million acres of trees to start with, and there was an unlimited, and it was cheap, and they got the land very, very cheaply. Thanks to the railroad, and all the land that came with it. So the trees were just immense, and working in the forest was as hard as working in the mills. There were accidents all the time. This was before there was any equipment, for most of these people.
They use those real long saws often.
Yes, long saws.
Long saws, two men, working them, and they had to be very, very careful because they had to use chains to haul those trees. They had to put the chains around them and then haul them up the hills. And that was really something. Now, one of the things that we've got here right now, let's look at this photo that we've got up now. It is about the inside of a lumber mill. And when we're looking at that, when we are looking at that image, we are not really getting into the depth of the lumber mill because there's that system that was processing everything. So this is something, you see the men standing there, but what we are not able to see is how they had to handle a lot of stuff by hand.
Well, it's all by hand. It wasn't very automated. And it was very grueling work. And
well, now there are the logs. Look at the logs over there.
They're just immense. And you could imagine working down there. It was like a living hell, and they would blow the whistle in the morning when your mill wanted you to go to work. And you had to listen for your whistle. And if you didn't show up, you lose your job. And then they blow the whistle when they thought that was enough. And from day to day, people didn't have set hours. So one of the things they were arguing about wasn't just how much they got paid, but when they had to work, and they were on constant call. They had no life. They were completely exploited.
That was very common back then. And this is something I think a lot of people today become very concerned about. Now, with the Everett Massacre, I had not, because I was totally ignorant of it, and your book goes into quite a bit of detail, but I saw the term wobblies.
Yes.
I had never heard the term Wobblies.
Cute, huh?
Share with my audience what that term means.
International workers of the world, and they were truly international. They were also called Reds and Commies. They were socialists, but what they wanted was some fairness, some class equality, and it was their point of view that the working man and the working woman were being exploited by the landed gentry who owned everything. And we see this today. It's nothing new. But back then in the Industrial Revolution, this is the age of the timber barons. Some called it the robber barons. You know, it was the Gilded Age where there were people becoming millionaires overnight, and often with investors from the East, like Rockefeller. And Rockefeller was a big investor, and then there were others that came from and put their money behind this effort. And they also thought there was gold out there, which there was, but it was too hard to get because it was so soggy and wet to process it. You can still see the little remnants of the Monte Carlo mine near Everett. But they came out there and they had this all wired from the beginning. The railroad wasn't completed until 1893, but in 1890, the investors like Rockefeller and his friends and Hill, they had organized the Everett Land Company, which had 5 industries in mind. There was the smelter, the nail factory, mills, the Monte Carlo mine. They had it all in mind what they wanted to do. And then there was the bank crisis, and then the whole thing fell apart, and then they reconstituted it under James J. Hill, who built the railroad in 1893 as the Everett Investment Company. But throughout all of history until quite late, it was just a group of wealthy business people that were completely running the town like a company town. They would decide where the parks were, where the schools were, where the roads were, where everything was.
And who was doing what?
That's right.
Who was going to be the mayor, they had control over the
And who
whole
was the
thing.
sheriff?
And who was the sheriff, yes.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of the sheriff, let's get into the massacre.
Yeah.
Because that is something that we have seen in the United States. It's been back east, we've seen the same thing that's occurred. This was horrifically violent. And there was let's see, we have the picture. I want people to know that with a picture of the dock area where the Wobblies were coming in. Now, how many of those Wobblies were coming in to do the quote-unquote peaceful demonstration?
300 originally on 2 boats, the Callista and the Verona from Seattle. And fortunately for the Wobblies, they had good union support from the dock workers in Seattle, who were all for them going out and organizing and helping the working man. And so they put them on the ships. Now, there were 100 on the Callista, and there were about 200 on the Verona. The Callista, when they were pulling, the Verona pulled in first, and then the sheriff shouted at them, and then the Callista backed off and left. So they never actually docked. So about 200 men, Wobblies, aboard the Verona docked at the port of Everett, the Everett dock, the Everett dock, the original one. And the sheriff and his deputies and a lot of town vigilantes that were mostly appointed by the sheriff and the businessmen, which was called the Commercial Club, and the mill owners. They had guns and clubs and hoes and rakes and anything that could be used as a weapon. And they met them on the boat, and they said, "You're not coming ashore." And all the Wobblies wanted to do on that first Sunday in November of 1916 was to go to the designated area in town, which is near where we saw earlier in town, and it was a designated called the Speaker's Square. And it was appointed that on Sunday at certain hours they could have speakers there. And the city had decreed that that was acceptable. And so they were exercising their right. And the Wobblies wanted to go and give speeches in support of the Union, because a week before there had been some brutality where the vigilantes and the sheriff had collected people at the previous Sunday meeting and rushed them all, bum rushed them, to Beverly Park at the edge of town. And they ran there through a gauntlet where they took turns hitting them and beating them. It was brutal. And they ran them through the gauntlet. And then some of them were so badly beaten that they put them on a train out of town to Mukilteo. And there was literally blood on the tracks. Well, that was the backdrop to the Everett Massacre. That and the fact that the shingle mills, the biggest businesses in town, had reneged on promises for better wages, going back 2 years.
2 years, no wages.
They were trying to get the 1914 agreement honored in 1916. Now, they'd come through some pretty good years, and the mills were doing fine. They were booming, but the men were still making poor wages. Some were making 50 cents an hour. So I think James in my story makes 50 cents an hour.
Yeah, he eventually got there, and that was because somebody had a horrific accident, and they needed to have a replacement, and he had been working at the mill long enough where they knew that he could be depended upon.
And remember, he had farm skills, so a lot of these farmers were from the Midwest were made really good mill workers because they knew how to work hard and they were clever to resolve situations. Yeah, fix things. So. But the sheriff wouldn't let them get off the boat. And all the Wobblies wanted to do was go up to Speaker Square on that November afternoon, Sunday afternoon called Bloody Sunday, and give speeches in support of the people that were brutally treated and run through the gauntlet the week before. They wanted to talk about the dignity of the common man and how there should be fairness and class equality. And this was their message, And they wouldn't let them speak, you know. And the week before, people would get up and speak, and they would, after they would get up and speak, they'd pull them off. They would bind them, and they'd take them off to the park and beat them. And so the Wobbly said, well, we're going to get up there and give some speeches, and they'll have to hear us. Well, the sheriff wouldn't let them off the boat. And so then a shot was fired, and that started the Everett Massacre. Now, many people say that the sheriff himself, McCrae, who actually had come out of one of the shingle mills as a worker, a hand-picked man from the shingle mill, was made sheriff.
Amazing.
And he was from Marysville. And a lot of people have said that he or one of his deputies probably fired the first shot. We'll never really know, but there's a lot of eyewitness accounts to that. Anyway, then it just got out of hand. It just got out of hand, and it became a massacre. And when they counted up all the bodies, they said there were 7 dead. And but there were far more than that. There were bodies that were found in the bay where the Verona had docked. Weeks later, they were finding bodies that were killed and dumped over. So we don't know the total number, but it was more than 7, much more than 7. And there were many, many more people that were injured. Hundreds were injured. It really got out of hand. And so the local papers didn't much cover this.
Yes, and that was the thing.
Yeah.
It was such a big and significant event.
Yeah.
And there was this, we're just going to put it underneath and just let it flow away. We're not going to give any coverage on this.
Yeah.
And it was all due to the controlling factors that existed at that time.
Yeah, don't rock the ship. The idea that was often used against the workers was it was unpatriotic to picket or unpatriotic to demand wages, that it was patriotic to work in the mill. You know, so yeah, and in researching this, I thought, well, the newspapers, there were 2 daily newspapers at the time. I thought surely I would get a lot of nice pictures and coverage out of that source. I got all these pictures we're seeing here today from the Everett Public Library, and most of them were taken by people who happened to be on the scene, who are not news gatherers.
Now here we've got a photo that is men and women both.
Yeah.
Now this really impressed me.
Yeah.
Because you see, and women's suffrage was coming to the forefront too at that time.
Yes.
Women were being more and more outspoken. There were the incidences in New York and other places on the East Coast where women were dying. The conditions that they were working in were just appalling. There was a huge fire in one of those places, and I don't know how many women died in that. But here you had the same thing with the men, and the women were doing whatever they could. Most families, the men and the women were working.
Yes.
And that's something that you bring out in your book. And I think historically that's very important for us to be aware of, that the fact of the women working, like Lydia, the primary character, she made bread.
Yeah.
And there was, what I loved is, Lydia didn't have much to do with politics. And there was an aspect in your book where they said, sacrifice a loaf of bread. Don't have that loaf of bread a week. She made the bread anyway and gave, sold it to different people.
Yeah.
But we're talking about times when a penny, we're discontinuing the penny now, but a penny could buy quite a bit.
I think you could buy a loaf of bread.
A nickel, and you'd buy a bone. I remember watching not too long ago, because I like the old movies. I like to look at the scenes and the backdrops and what they did in the old films. And there was this 7 cents for a beef bone. That's outrageously expensive. And I think, my goodness, look at what inflation has done, with food today, and look at what we're looking at as inflation.
But they were happy to have a beef bone, you see.
Yeah, getting a beef bone
just
for
a
soup.
bone, yeah.
It's really something. But this photo shows not any kind of violence. It shows children in the background playing with each other. They're playing with a ball or something. And then you've got these men and women that are standing up and speaking out. These were early Americans that were saying, we've got to change things.
This is an early Everett political demonstration by the working class. And you see the women, they're wearing IWW, International Workers of the World, and they're wearing their best suits, and they're marching with American flags, and doing it peacefully, mind you. I don't know, there might have been, after this picture was taken, police that came and dispersed the crowd, but there's quite a few of them, aren't there? And there was a lot of support for what was happening in Everett, because Everett really tried to unionize. And I think part of the story here is not just that Everett was the only mill town in America. There's mill towns everywhere, and this was just one of them. But Everett tried to unionize, and they were in. It was very hard in Everett because of the personalities of the mill owners and the Eastern backers that had built up the town. They wouldn't allow it, and so. Yeah, there was a lot of support for what was happening. They had a union paper in town, which is still working today.
Really?
Still a union paper, a weekly newspaper, a good one. And there were actually unions for the mills, like the shingle workers had a union. And in fact, that was the agreement of 1914 that was reneged on, and they were arguing over the cause that precipitated the Everett Massacre.
So we've got that one, and then there's another one that I thought was just very, very significant, and I've got a list here. Oh, the funeral There's the grave.
Yeah.
There's the grave markers.
Yeah.
And then I think it was number 14,
Yeah.
the wobbly
Yeah.
funerals.
Yeah.
And that is, that is something. There you've got
Yeah.
the grave markers. You've got the
Wobbly.
people that were there to honor and to respect those that had been so brutalized.
Yeah.
When you were putting this book together, when you were writing about it, because Everett is your hometown. This is, this is part of your life, of your family history. When you found out about the Everett Massacre, what was that like for you?
I was shocked that nobody wanted to talk about it.
Interesting.
They didn't deny that it happened, but they didn't want to get into it. They just kind of let it drop. It was silence, a wall of silence. It was collective amnesia. And it was such a horrific time that somehow the town had gotten through it and progressed beyond there to where most of the mills are gone today. The smokestacks are gone. And it is, as the park bench always said, Everett, the friendly city now. And it's grown up, and it has nice sidewalks and not muddy streets. So they have hospitals now, and people get paid, the mandated minimum wage, But I mean, even when I was right out of high school to get money to go to college, I worked in a little mill myself, and I made less than $2 an hour, which was really poor wages for very hard work. And I found the work to be just extremely demanding physically.
Oh, it very much is. When you reflect on this and you look at those images of the people that died for what they believed in and experienced such a horrific situation, did you find that it made any kind of an impression on anyone? I know that your book goes from the 1800s up into the early 1900s. There's World War I that is experienced. James and Lydia end up having a son, and then you evolve through that. But the world that they were in then, it disappeared very, very quickly. And you go into the banking situation, the economic failures that happened that affected people. And yet the lumber industry was just doing absolutely magnificently. The railroad industry was doing magnificently. So you bring out all of these different components. When you were doing your research, because the library was so important, I recall in your book talking about Andrew Carnegie and the public libraries. And this is something that I find very few people are aware of. Yes, this man was the big, I like to call him the kahuna of the steel industry. But he sold his industry to J.P. Morgan. And it would have been, he was, in our world, he would have been a billionaire.
Oh, yes.
Many times over.
Oh, yes.
But anyway, he determined that he was literally going to spend every penny, and he wanted to support groups and different things. And so he started the public library system, which enabled the children of Everett, where they had never had that before. James had only had a third-grade education. I remember my granddad finding out that he had only gone to the third grade because he was raised in Virginia, and it was on a farm, German background, and he had to quit school at the third grade because he had to be on the farm.
Right.
And he was very intelligent. He was a fine craftsman. He was just very, very talented. Self-educated, I would say, in many respects, but was able to read contracts and everything else, where the male character, James, he had the third grade education, but he didn't know about contracts, and he didn't have that background. And his story, for me, when I was reading it, was very heartbreaking because of the demeanor of the bank industry, and we have that today even. But when you go through your book, survival in a mill town, It portrays an aspect of American history that I think is very important for people to be aware of, because it wasn't just here that this was going on. It was all throughout the nation.
Yeah.
And that the diversity, here you have people that were sons and daughters of immigrants that had come in. They didn't take anything for granted. They had to work hard. And all of this you bring out. When you finished all of your research and you were done with it, what did that feel like for you? Did you feel like you have honored and recognized people that otherwise had been totally ignored?
Yes, I felt like I'd told their story the way they wanted it told, but I also thought, well, I've kind of opened up a can of worms, because we're exactly there again. We see corporate owners, big business, just walking on top of people, you know, ignoring unions. And Everett is a story of like early unions. It really is. It's a story of building Washington State and the Pacific Northwest and the logging industry. Yes, that's true. It's a story of the railroad coming out and the immigrants coming out on handbills to work. This is all true. But it's also the story of unions, because people outside of Everett who are in unions know the story very well. Everett today is a union town. You know, if you're going to get a haircut, you get your haircut at a union barbershop.
Interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
Oh, yes. Yes, I remember
Wow.
as a boy there were picketers at non-union barbershops. It is very much a union town. And it wasn't always that way. They had to work very hard for dignity, because the union, they tried to present the unions as a friendly worker to mill owner negotiations. But the power was all on one side, because when they blew the whistle, the worker knew they had to go to work, or else. And so I wanted people to see just what it was like to work in a mill. It was kind of hopeless, but there were people that survived the Everett Massacre, and I wrote the book for them. These are the survivors of the mill town.
And there are still some mills running, but they're not running like they did years ago.
No. When I grew up, there was still the Weyerhaeuser Mill A and B were still working along the where the Snohomish River runs into Puget Sound, and they were going strong. And that was the cover of the book. Is actually a Weyerhaeuser Mill B from the bay, and But the mill, and I remember we complained. One of my first jobs was writing a magazine piece about the stinky smokestacks. But I never really stopped to think, you know, there were people that actually lived with that smell all of the time, and they smelled it from the inside out as workers in the mills.
And that's why James and Lydia liked being on their farm.
Yeah,
they were outside of quote unquote the city
yeah,
area.
They never wanted to go into the mill town. They liked being outside of town with their dairy cows. And then the bank crisis started, the 1893 bank crisis, and the banks panicked and they called the loans due, whether they were delinquent or not. They just called them due, and they took the farm. And and Jim and Lydia, they worried about, well, who will take care of the animals if you just boot us off? So they wanted to stay there to the last minute, so the animals were cared for. And he didn't want to go into town because that's where the stinky smokestacks were. A horrible place. But that's where his brothers had taken jobs in sawmills, and he followed them because there was no other work.
You know, there is so much of that in American history when you think about it. There have been those times where there's so little that's available, and I think there's a lot of that that's going on today. And when we were chatting, and of course you've been on my radio show as well, so when we talk about this, we can look at the parallels of what people were going through then, back in the 1800s, and then you went not just into the 1800s, you go into the early 1900s. You know, the Model T comes out, and that changes things dramatically, just dramatically. And then you have the phone, the party lines. The last time I heard about a party line was when I was in Homer, Alaska. And, you know, I'm sure there may even be some places still that have a party line, but it's very, very unlikely. But that was a big deal then, to be able to talk on the phone to someone. So you bring out in your book the, you know, survival in a mill town. That's the title of your book, Vaughn. So you bring this out, and it's so important, I think, for us to know about the history of the past. We need to know about that. We need to be aware of it, because we can see the parallels. Look at where we are today. They're telling people today, well, artificial intelligence, that's going to be taking everything away, and that's not true. It's going to affect a lot of things, but it's not going to take everything away. So there's that adaptation, just like James and Lydia had to go through in the 1800s. They had to do an adaptation.
But it's, you know, it's going to take a lot of jobs away from people.
Oh, sure.
And unions today have very little strength in this country. They've been crippled again. They've been brought down to their knees again. And most people don't belong to a union. I've never belonged to a union. But I'm writing about the union struggle because the unions brought us the middle class in this country. They built Everett. They built the waterfront. They built the Pacific Northwest. The unions built this country. It wasn't just built with capitalistic investors, you know. That certainly helped, but they were built brick by workers that worked very, very hard. Anyone who's lived in a house that was built, you know, 100 years ago knows the craftsmanship of the workers, you know, and how what pride there was in putting in a good day's work and doing a job right.
I agree. One of the things, Vaughn, that I would like for you to share with my viewers, and also that will be my listeners, because the audio of this will be played on my show as well. I'd like for you to share your website, because you have done something special with your website, in as much as people can send in photos. If they have historical photos, they can send them to you. So it looks like you're going to be doing some more historical research and perhaps doing more writing.
Well, it's fun. I wanted to make it interactive with people. Now, a lot of people have mill town stories. It might not be a lumber mill or a pulp mill or a shake mill, but they've been in a mill town. They might have worked in a mill town or come from a mill town family, or there was a mill town in their life, and they have pictures or stories to share. And so I say, go to my website and click on to share your pictures or your memories of a mill town. And the website is Vaughn Braschler website.
And I want to spell your last name, Braschcher, is that correct?
L-E-R.
Okay, Brasch, correct me.
L-E-R.
L-E-R, Braschler.
We have website.com.
Yes, Vaughn,
and
yes.
so if you just click on my name, I think it'll pop up. And it talks about this book and the writing of this book, but moreover, there's the link you'll see right at the top where I want people to share their own pictures and their own stories. And there are a lot of stories.
Oh, there's so many stories. I have just really not only enjoyed your book, but I've enjoyed meeting you in person, having had you again on my radio show. And for those of you that are watching, I want to invite you to also know that the Donna Sebo radio show is heard Monday through Friday, and it is on the internet, and you can just Google my name, Donna Sebo, and that link will come up, and you'll be able to have access to all kinds of programs. And there's also the program Warriors for Peace that I do as well, and that creates a double header every Wednesday. So through this television programming, I have the privilege of being able to bring to you those authors, those people that take the time to do what they do, and that is write. And I think knowing about American history is so important, and it's just a delight to be able to interact with the many people that I've interacted with, because they have shared with me their story, and I consider it a privilege to have people like Vaughn with me on the show so that we can make you aware of how significant literacy is, education is, and being open to learning about new things. But more than anything else, don't be afraid to step into new territory that allows you to explore the past, the history, and realize that where you are today is a very significant time, very significant time. I'm so glad you've joined us. I invite you to join me for other future programming, and go to YouTube. You'll find the Donna Sebo Television Show special editions up there available to you 24/7. I'll say goodbye for now, and we'll be talking again. Bye.
You have been listening to the Donna Sebo Show special editions. The audio version of this program will also be heard on the Donna Sebo Show radio broadcast. We are delighted you were able to join us and invite you to share this programming with your friends and family. Have a rich and fulfilling life.